When I was a young man, about the age of 21, I had a motorcycle wreck. I was killed, taken to the hospital. I was in a coma for 12 hours. I came out of the coma, was in the hospital for the following 33 days. I have lots of scars all over my body from the different places I was broken, mostly on this side. I have steel in this leg. The femur was in about 400 pieces. The radius of my wrist was up under my skin, up here by my elbow. They pulled that down, put pins in it. I lost all my upper teeth. I had fissures in my skull up above my teeth. And that's why I went into the coma for about 12 hours. Your brain swells. And when I had the experience, I went to the other side and I communed with the light. I went directly to the light. I didn't remember a tunnel, like many people go through a tunnel and those kind of things. I very clearly remember coming back into the body and returning into the flesh. Somewhere in the vicinity of the head, I come in and I slam into the body. It's very painful. Not the pain of my injuries, but the pain of living, the pain of being here. So when I had the near-death experience afterwards, and I'm trying to talk to the physicians and people in the hospital and the psychiatry departments, deciding they want to put me in the nut house because, after all, this can't be real. You think you went to the other side, you think you're Jesus, you came back to life. So the orthopedic surgeon puts me in a wheelchair, puts my clothes in my lap, takes me out the back door of the hospital. I'm still wearing the hospital gown, and puts me in my mother's car and we drive off. And then they're trying to commit me on that day to the local insane asylum. So then I sort of closed down. But I began to notice that right away that I was more sensitive. All my life, I'm someplace and I'll see something taking place that has a lot of heart in it. And when I see that, I tear up. I get very emotional about it. I see this is life. This is what life is. And I get emotional and I get lots of feelings. I'm very empathetic that way. And I wasn't who I was before. And all of a sudden now I'm so empathetic. And so I learned to close that in and close that up. And I go on through college. I'm studying physics. I made my career in naval architecture, marine engineering, and I've learned the Newtonian physics. And all my life I'm thinking, we're studying this little corner of the world, and it's a huge universe, and all we know is this. But I use this, it works very well. I design ships, everything works fine. And then, just a few years ago, they began to talk about dark energy in the late part of the 1990s. And they said, we see light energy, which is 5% of the universe, and there's all this dark energy, which makes dark energy, dark matter, makes up 95% of the universe, that we don't discern. We can't even detect it. We can see its effects, but we can't otherwise see it. And I'm thinking, I knew that. We were looking at this little 5% in the corner called light energy or Newtonian physics, and I knew all that was out there. And so now that's how I explain it to people. But in those days, I had no way to explain it. What could I tell them? There's all this that we don't know, that's out there that we don't see. What we see is the light energy. It's 5% of the universe. It's a very small portion. And the other 95% we do not observe. If you just look at the radioactive vibrations, you look at the spectrum of electromagnetic vibration, you'll see that we observe light, just this little area of frequency that we observe as light. Some of the insects and stuff can observe ultraviolet, and we can't even see it. It's right here around us all the time. When you feel warm in a room, you sit by a fire and you feel warm by the fire, that's infrared light coming out. And it is visible to an infrared camera. It's not visible to you because your eye isn't set up to see that. And there's a whole reality that we're missing 95% of. We can't feel it, see it, or know that it's there. We can't hear it, we don't observe it. But then, about 1978, they formed the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And then finally, I guess it was 2006, I decided I'm going to study the other side. I know that I've been there, and now the Near-Death Association is saying it's valid, what I'm saying. My experience that I know was real. They've got a reason for it, a basis for it. And so I decided I will now study, because I'm going to retire, I will now study to be a medium, to study mediumship as a scientist. I was still afraid of the spiritualists and what are they doing over there, I didn't know, because my mother was a conservative Baptist and she had said that's all of the devil, you shouldn't do that. So I was afraid of it. But I studied it anyway, and I studied with the Morris Pratt Institute. They have a correspondence course that's about 100 years old now. It's been revised several times, but the tradition of it is 100 years. And it should take you 4 years to get through the reading. And after I finished that, then I began to do mediumship. And then I got involved with the spiritualist church, and I do mediumship in front of the congregation, where a stranger will be sitting there, and I bring through their grandmother on their mother's side with the name and a description of her personality, and then a message. So instead of just being an investigator, I am one. You have to become one to investigate it. So I became a medium, and that's been very successful for me. Other researchers sometimes aren't as successful because they want to maintain their professional reserve and their professional skepticism, be open to it but still be a skeptic. And because of that, it doesn't always work for them when they investigate it. They're going to precipitate the negative reality instead of the positive reality. They're going to create the reality that they're looking for. We call that the observer principle. And so I went in as a believer, to believe in it, chose to do that. And therefore it works pretty well. Michael Shermer is the guy that writes a skeptic column for Scientific American, and I read Scientific American cover to cover. I'm a scientist. I read these things, and I'm always want to know everything. So when Dr. Eben Alexander came out with his book, Proof of Heaven, after he, a neurosurgeon, 17 years a professor at Harvard, had a near-death experience, he wrote about it. And he said, this blows me away because I'm an atheist, and here's this. I've been to the other side. What am I going to tell you now? And so he wrote this book, which became a bestseller. Michael Shermer wrote about him, and instead of arguing the facts of what he had said, he made innuendos, and he did character assassination. He did all kinds of things against Dr. Alexander, rather than arguing with the facts and the data. And so I wrote back, and of course Shermer said it was a hallucination. He had a hallucination. And I wrote back to Scientific American, and I said, well, if the near-death people are having a hallucination, would you please explain to me why they're all having the same hallucination? I mean, hallucinations are going to have different experiences. These guys are all having the same experience in the same sequence. So there's something to this because nobody's taught them the sequence, nobody's organized it in advance, and they're reporting basically the same thing. Now, some of them will say they talked with a light, some of them they talked with Jesus, some will say they talked with God, some will say they talked with Krishna. Every one of them talked with a being of light, just different names. The names may come out of their tradition in their words, trying in their vocabulary to describe what they saw, but the fact is they all saw a being of light. And that's how the near-death experience works. Everybody has the same experience. They go through a tunnel or they go through a period of darkness, but they get to the light, and then they come back. So if they're all having the same experiences, it cannot be a hallucination. My friend Luis Minero, he's very good at this, and he really can explain these. He studies this out of body and how to do it.
While we are outside the body, you can observe, for example, the physical reality pretty much in real time, and you can see what is happening there. If you look at yourself, you realize that you're wearing, or you're using, I guess, what people usually call an astral body. A body that looks exactly like your physical body to the most minute detail. Even, a little scar that you might have from when you fell and broke your arm as a kid, the astral body has that. And you can go and see the real physical dimension, reality, which helps us also to confirm, by the way, the out-of-body experiences. Something I did once when I was a teenager. Even though I knew I was clear that I was having out-of-body experiences, I wanted sort of like to have more of a verification or a proof of that. So something that I did is I remember I left my body and I went, it's very simple, really, anybody can do it, but I went maybe like 3 or 4 blocks away from my house, and I wanted to see in the middle of the night the cars that were parked there, the colors of the cars, and then I tried to memorize the license plate of one of them. And then I came back to my body, and then here you had the 17-year-old in his pajamas walking at 2 a.m. in the morning, to go verify, the cars. And when I arrived, it was exactly the same cars and exactly the same license plate. So when you're having an out-of-body experience, you can see, what is happening in the physical reality, but the physical people normally cannot perceive you simply because the physical eye and the physical ear are not tuned to the astral body. They really cannot see you.
A lot of mediums who work with deceased or discarnate spirits are accused of cold reading. And cold reading is when you come into a room and you look at the person and you start doing things like, okay, you're from France and you've got brunette hair, so if I was to bring your mother, I'd think she had brunette hair. So I got your mother here. Is your mother deceased? Now, doing it that way, I got your mother here. Is your mother deceased? You can say no. So then I'll just forget your mother. Or if you say yes, now I've got your mother here, but I didn't really bring her through, did I? I got you to say yes, my mother's deceased. It's when you come through and you say, I have your mother who died 4 years ago, and she died of cancer, and she was not a brunette like you. Actually, she had kind of a brownish, reddish hair color. And we start doing that kind of evidence coming through when I don't even know you from Adam. I don't know who you are, and I'm seeing you there, and I don't know who you are, and it's obvious that I'm not cold reading. So at Arthur Findlay College, outside of, between Cambridge and London in Stansted, England, we go there and we study how to do this kind of evidence, how to open our mind to the other side. And again, we're using our sixth sense. So we have to shut down the five senses that we normally use. For me, it's almost like a personality shift, and I've sometimes suspected, do I have two personalities in one body? I'm not sure. They used to call that crazy if you had more than one personality in a body, but ever since I came back, I have this other personality that can get very emotional. And it's almost like a different person. And so if I shut down the professor, we'll call it the professor, if I shut the professor down, I become the medium. In the Myers-Briggs system, I'm an ESTJ professor, and I'll shut down and become an INFP feeling person. And that's when I do the mediumship. I'm in that other mode. And then I'm reading the other side and I'm bringing it through. And at Arthur Findlay, they teach us how to do this evidence. So I shift into that mode, and then I learn how to get the evidence. And for me, evidence is very important, being a scientist. So Spirit gives me a lot of names, and sometimes I'll do strings of names for different spirits in a room in a row. And it's not, when I say I'll do it, it's not me. It's the Spirit delivering this information from the holographic universe or the Akashic record or from those spirits. What we like to say, and what we've been saying for 2,500 years of recorded history, the mediums have been saying another spirit is talking to us, a deceased spirit is talking to us. Science would like to say, well, maybe you're reading that off the surface of the earth. It's by decoherence, the resonance of the history has been deposited upon the earth, and you're reading it off the surface. Okay, I'm a scientist. I'm not going to say I'm reading the Akashic record, I'm reading the holographic. I'm not going to define it. Somewhere I'm getting this information, and the science that we did at the Institute for Noetic Sciences, we're studying mediumship, and I was one of their subjects. And what I was doing was we were replicating a previous study that was been done. And in that previous study, they had found by using EEG on the head, the cranium of a medium, they could measure what's going on within the brain. And they can measure the kind of energy. And they found that the mediums were making gamma waves. They were not making theta waves and alpha waves. If they were making theta and alpha, they would be using their imagination and being creative. Instead, they're just using their eyes, their ears, and their muscles, because the gamma is what operates your muscles. So you're making gamma waves, and from this they derive by various means that the information that the medium is presenting is coming from outside their brain. So they are connecting with the Akashic record, the holographic universe, something. So I know we're connecting with something outside. I want to believe, from my own experience of the near-death experience, I want to believe that this is discarnate, surviving consciousness that's talking to me. Okay, that's the easiest one for me to believe, and it has been the easiest thing for mediums to believe for 2,500 years. Okay, sometimes they think it's telepathy. So sometimes I get a piece of information from, or I or another medium gets a piece of information that the sitter, the person who came to see the medium, doesn't have in their brain. And they go check it out and find out later that this piece of information is true by checking with their relatives. So then the skeptical scientists will say, I, the medium, was reading the mind of the relative across the country someplace. I didn't even know this relative. How am I going to find their mind in all the minds out there and then pick their brain from wherever I'm at, clear across the country, pick their brain at that moment when they're not even thinking about this? And I'm just digging through their brain like a bunch of files, and I pull out, oh, there's the file I want. How in the world did I do that? I can't do that in the library. I mean, I may know that something exists in the Library of Congress, but I can't access the file in the Library of Congress from over here. How could I access their brain? And usually the skeptic who's saying this doesn't believe in telepathy anyway. He says ESP is not true. So you can't use something you don't believe in to disprove something else. I mean, that's ridiculous. If you don't believe in ESP to begin with, you can't use it to shoot down mediumship. So I have done this on occasion. I was working with Mary Franklin, and she says, I can speak about this. Mary Franklin, I brought through her grandmother. And I said, Mary, I've got your grandmother here. It's something about 1890. It seems like she should be your great-grandmother, not your grandmother, because of the time difference. But she's also telling me that her name is Mary. And that doesn't make sense to me because your name is Mary, so that doesn't seem right. So that's just me thinking that up probably. But now she's saying, no, my other name is Margaret. And I mumbled it just like that. Okay, so I said, and she died of, it feels like she died of breast cancer. I've got a chest pain. But I know she pulled her hair back in a bun in the back of her head. And she had brown hair, and she pulled it back in a bun. And something about 1890, I don't know what it's, 1890s. I don't know what that's about. Maybe that's when she died. I don't know. Mary doesn't know all these answers. First thing Mary says, does that make sense to you, Mary? She says, her name's Mary. I'm named after her. And I don't know what her middle name is, but it could be Margaret, it could be Margot. I'm not sure. I'll find out. We go find out. I get a picture back. On the back of the picture, it says, Mary Adelaide, nicknamed Mamie, Margot, Margaret, Mamie. If I just had said Mama, I would have had it. I've been real close. And so that's what I was coming through. And I don't stutter. So I was stuttering away with this to saying Mamie. And so we looked at that. And then the picture, she's got her hair in a bun. The picture was taken in 1894. Mary herself, the sitter, said to me, my grandma died before I was born, and the message I had given Mary was, the grandma says, I love you even though I never knew you. That was the message I brought through. She says, and that verifies your message. She died before I was born, and I was born very late in my parents' marriage. So it looks like she's my great-grandma instead of my grandma because of the distance, the time in it. Okay, so I had all these facts that came through, like Mamie and the bun and all this other stuff, and the picture was 1894. She didn't have the nickname Mamie in her mind. So I would have had to pick the mind of her cousin on the East Coast from the long distance. I can't do that. Well, first off, I don't even guess this stuff. I just deliver it. I'm just the postman bringing the mail, you know. And to accuse the postman of writing the letters is kind of ridiculous. Two things that they want to do, and people ask me, how come does my Uncle Joe come through? I don't want to hear from Uncle Joe. I hate him. But I want to talk to Grandma. Well, when Grandma died, they were there, and Grandma says, I love you, bye-bye, I'm going, okay? So Grandma's done with her communication. But Uncle Joe, the one that molested you, is not done with the communication. Uncle Joe wants to say, I'm sorry. I get it now. I realize that was wrong. And Uncle Joe apparently needs to make reparation on that side and get your forgiveness. And Uncle Joe wants to come through much more insistently than Grandma, who already told you she loved you when she left. She says, I love you, I'll see you when you get here. You know, and she went off. Okay, so Grandma doesn't have a pressing need to talk to you and tell you she loves you, but Uncle Joe might. Uncle Joe's the one that molested you. He might have some reason he needs to talk to you now. Sorry about that. You know, he's really, okay, and so that we get a lot of that. Now, we as a medium can't say from the platform in front of the church, oh yeah, your uncle who molested you. We can't say that. We have codes of ethics, and we have to say, I've got Uncle Joe here. And then the person says, I don't want to hear from Uncle Joe. Yeah, but he was kind of a rough character, wasn't he? And they say, yes, he was. And so we make little sideline remarks like that till we that they can say, yeah, I know that's got to be Uncle Joe. That's really him. He was a jerk. Okay. And then we say, he says he's sorry for all of the things he did. And that's as close as we can get to it. We can't say he's sorry he molested you. We have codes of ethics, so we won't talk about stuff. We won't bring out anything private in a greeting. So then we're stuck in the struggle between being a wide open channel and a wide open pipeline for them to just pour the information through, but I have to edit the information as it's coming out so that I don't say something that'll get me in a lawsuit or that'll, there's certain things I cannot say even if I want to. So I have to keep a little bit of the scientist professor going here to edit the information, to filter it. So that makes it difficult to do it. Discarnate spirits, people who are dead in our terms, want to deliver messages, and they do. The spirit will use symbols that mean something to you. They will repeatedly bring it to you in a synergistic way. And when you do the statistical analysis, which my friend Dr. Gary Swartz, the University of Arizona, he does a lot of statistical analysis. He calls it super synchronicity. And he looks at the synchronicity of things. He'll get a symbol. It might be a raven or a fish or something else. And suddenly it'll start appearing every place and everything. The same symbol will keep coming back. And he'll get a message from a medium with a symbol in it. And then he'll see a sign with a symbol on it. And so he video cameras this stuff. He writes it down. He keeps notes. And he even has, for analysis, he even has sets of qualification standards where there are 2 synchronicities, 5 synchronicities, 8 synchronicities. And then he does a statistical analysis of the odds of these things happening. And sometimes if you have like 5 synergistic things in a row, where all in one day this person called you and said this and then that, and you connected together and everybody all day long said something about ravens. And you hadn't heard ravens in weeks, and yet this got 5 times. The statistical analysis comes up with that would happen just on odds of it happening, would happen every 28 million years. That's how odd and how rare these things are, and yet they happen to us all the time. You can think, well, I remember I had 3 things that, you can remember these synchronicities. And the synchronicities, in some cases, they get out to 7 or 8 synchronicities. It'll take 10 times the length of the universe's history for this to occur once in statistics. Just letting random numbers happen. It is going to take 10 times the length of the universe. 130 billion years. I mean, it can't happen, but it did happen. So how did it happen? It must be directed, controlled intelligence. There's info there that's organized. It's organized info. There must be intelligence of some sort behind it. We in science can't even define what consciousness is, and yet we see the effects of higher consciousness, if you want to call it that. We've got a lot to learn. I do have a recording made by Edmund Randall. He worked with Emily French in the state of New York in Buffalo for 15 years, and she worked with direct voice. And he interviewed David Hassock. David Hassock is the MD who founded the Columbia Medical School when it was still called King's College. David died in 1835 and was coming through from the other side with Emily French, and he told, by a specific question, Edmund Randall had asked him, what's it like when you die? And he describes the death process in a book you can buy, a 1995 book, The French Revelation. That's a compiling of all of his books. David Hassock said the same things that we see in the near-death experience was what occurred when he died. Exactly the same. And so he describes that process. And hearing him describe that process in a book published in 1906, when we didn't have the word near-death experience until 1975, when Raymond Moody published his book, Life After Life. And that, for me, is confirmation that this experience being described then could not have been something that was cooked up by Edmund Randall, who's writing the book. It's coming through from the other side. It's coming through from that MD on the other side who's saying this is what it was like to die. And so much of what he says agrees with the near-death experience that I entitled my book The Death Experience rather than the near-death experience when I describe my own experience. I died. And when people say, can we reincarnate? Or they'll say, I don't believe in reincarnation. And I'll say, do you believe in the near-death experience? They say, oh yeah, that's real. Okay, I went out of body and I came back in the body. That's reincarnation. I reincarnated. So it's obviously possible to leave and come back. And if we can do it in the existing body, we can probably do it in a new body. So here's the truth. We don't know if the reincarnation again and again is real or not, but we have lots of evidence that it's real, and we don't have any evidence against it, and it's certainly a real possibility. So when people say, well, I don't believe in that, or I don't want to believe in that, they need to look at what they're saying. I don't want that to be true, but what if it is? As a scientist, I have to find out what is true. Not what do I want to be true, but what is true, and that's why I'm always looking at it. Or maybe, and this is one a lot of people don't think about, maybe an aspect of our consciousness or our soul comes back over here, and another aspect comes back over there. Maybe we split up and recombine, and how do we split up? I don't know. We don't even know what consciousness is, and yet we're trying to speculate all this. It must mean this. Well, we can't do that. Like Carl Sagan says, we just don't know. But we're going to find out if we're open and if we investigate things. But if we say, no, it has to be this way, we're lost. Stanford Research Institute down in Palo Alto spent 24 years working for the government, working first for NASA and then for the CIA and the Defense Department on various projects, generally known as the Stargate project. That was one of the projects named. And they did remote viewing. And Colonel McGonigal, he was able to do some really fantastic stuff. When the Russians were building the Trident submarine, they had a little plant, and it was near a waterway, but there was no way to get from the building to the waterway. And he went on a remote viewing assignment to that exact latitude and longitude, and he went there, and while he's sitting in Virginia doing his thing, he goes clear over to Russia, and he goes to this building, he goes inside the building, and he sees them building a double-hulled submarine with 22 tilted launch tubes. And he describes it in detail. Well, the Navy and everybody else thought they were building a ship there, but they thought it was some kind of a supply vessel. They had no idea it was a new class of submarine with 2 hulls. And so he comes back and he tells about it. And they said, oh, that's fine if that's what's really in there. I mean, we can't see in the building, so go back and find out when it's going to launch. And he said it's going to launch, this was in 1979, he said it's going to launch in January of 1980. They're going to, well, in 1980 it's going to come out, and in January, well, they began then, next thing happened, they started digging a trench next to the building so they could float this thing and get it down there. And it actually was the Typhoon class submarines. And it did have 2 hulls, and it did have 22 tilted launch tubes for missiles. With our materialist science at the moment, we have no way to explain remote viewing. And so consequently, those people who desperately want materialism to be true will say that it's impossible. It couldn't have been done, and the guys at Stanford Research Institute are just plain lying. They'll call them liars, and yet they're not. They're just open scientists saying, this is my data, look at it.
Many of these psychic things are quite natural, and my function is not so much to teach people how to do remote viewing as to give them permission to use an ability that we already have. And I could say that our program at SRI was not an airy-fairy program doing intuitive diagnosis, but we were funded for about $25 million by the CIA and DIA, Army Intelligence, for 23 years. So this was an ongoing intelligence gathering activity. We described a Chinese atomic bomb test 3 days before it was carried out, and we're accurate in describing that although the test would be carried out, it would fail. They would just burn the uranium in a big pyrotechnic display. Ingo Swann described that 3 days in advance. So in addition to the discovery that distance doesn't matter, that it's no harder to describe a Soviet weapons test in Novosibirsk, 6,000 miles away, than it is to describe something across the street in Palo Alto. We also showed that you can describe things in the future just as accurately as the present. In fact, after I left SRI, we set up a little company called Delphi Associates, and one of our big successes was forecasting changes in the silver commodity market with an enthusiastic investor. Every week for 9 weeks, we forecasted whether December silver would go up a little or up a lot, down a little or down a lot, and we were successful every time. Edgar Casey was a early remote viewing. He was a person who specialized in intuitive diagnosis. He was called a sleeping prophet because he would do his medical intuition when he was resting or sleeping, and he diagnosed thousands of people describing their illnesses, and I have done that as well. In fact, it turns out that intuitive diagnosis is easier than remote viewing of a distant place. And 2 physicians that I know, Judith Orloff is a psychiatrist in Los Angeles, and she has a very good book called Second Sight, talking about intuitive diagnosis. There's a diagnosis of a person who is not in the room with you. And Mona Lisa Schultz is a Harvard-based psychiatrist who's written a book called Awakening Intuition, Teaching Intuitive Diagnosis. And it seems that that's easier to do than remote viewing because you have a human person to interact with. Now, you may not know that person. Somebody may come to you and say, "Can you tell me what's the matter with my sister Susie?" And of course, you don't know her sister Susie. But if you've learned to quiet your mind, you can visualize that person and quite accurately describe what's the matter with her.
Nothing. We have no evidence. We have no evidence that the consciousness arises from the brain. We just assume that that's true. It makes sense to us. We think if we hurt our brain, if we hurt our head, the brain doesn't work as well as it used to. So therefore, we take from that and we derive that the consciousness must come out of the brain. Not true.
I'm a cardiologist, so I had the privilege to have patients who survived cardiac arrest. Started out of curiosity to ask patients who survived a cardiac arrest if they could remember something of this period of unconsciousness. And then, to my big surprise, within 2 years, out of 50 patients I asked, 12 patients told me about the death experience. And that's the moment my scientific curiosity started to grow, because of, according to our current medical knowledge, it's impossible to experience consciousness during cardiac arrest when circulation and breathing have ceased. So this is how it started for me. I have learned as a medical student and as a young doctor that we have the assumption, it shouldn't be discussed, that consciousness is a product of the function of the brain. So that's the reason it's impossible to experience consciousness when you have a cardiac arrest.
But is there any scientific evidence that consciousness is produced by the brain?
No, it's a non-proven assumption. It's just an hypothesis. But everybody accepts it because most people have the experience that you experience consciousness when you're awake. Mm-hmm. As neuroscientists see activities in neuroimaging techniques, they believe that they see something which could be the consciousness.
The current meta-paradigm says the real world is the material world. This is the real stuff. Space, time, and matter are primary. And again, just as it seemed obvious that the Earth was still, it seems obvious that this stuff is real. And we don't question it most of the time. This seems the real world. But there's an anomaly in this worldview. And it's a real anomaly. I mean, things like remote viewing, reincarnation, healing, these are all problems for this worldview. But they're not yet real anomalies for the worldview because they're still not accepted as problems by the majority of scientists. Some people see them as problems. Other people just say, oh, we'll understand them later. It's false reporting or coincidence, whatever. So they're not yet the status of a true anomaly in the Kuhnian sense, because they haven't yet got to the stage where everybody accepts it's real. There is, however, one anomaly for this worldview, this meta-paradigm, and that is consciousness itself. And it's a real anomaly because it cannot be doubted. We can't doubt the fact we're conscious, and it cannot be explained.
If the brain is only a filter or a television station receiving the signal, if you have a television and you take a sledgehammer and you hit the television, you will break the television and the signal will no longer come through the television. And yet the signal is still being transmitted out there. So if the consciousness is the TV station and the brain is the television set, then that signal can be picked up by other television sets. And this is how we communicate between each other. Okay? If our mind actually exists out of body, the mind could communicate with different brains, different television sets from one signal station.
And this is the paradox. We all know we're conscious, and there's no way to explain it in science. It's easier to explain probably how the universe evolved from the Big Bang or whatever it was that set it off all the way through to the present day. That's easier to explain than why any of us ever has a single thought in our mind. This is something which science has consistently ignored. The universe works perfectly well without any understanding of consciousness. We don't need consciousness to explain the universe. And in fact, you get this sort of rather interesting paradox here that science would be much happier if there weren't such a thing as consciousness. And yet without consciousness, there wouldn't be any science. How does something as immaterial as consciousness ever arise from something as unconscious as matter? We assume that matter is unconscious, and therefore our brain cells are unconscious, and all the chemical, electrical activity that goes on is unconscious. How the hell does consciousness come out of it? That's what's often called the hard problem of consciousness. I actually don't think it's a hard problem at all. I think it's an impossible problem.
The basic premise in physical or material science is that the universe started with the Big Bang, and then all these chemicals formed in the stars, and those chemicals are basically inert. They're dead, and they're just like the rock is dead. I'll just say the rock. And eventually the chemicals got together and formed life. They can't explain how that happened, but it just did. Okay, that's their explanation. It just did. And then the rock that became alive became conscious. And they think consciousness is a byproduct of a living brain. My picture is a little different. I say that the living brain was designed by the consciousness which existed before anything. So consciousness existed and the whole universe developed to suit life. And when you look at all the things that had to happen just right, if this had just been 2% off or 1/2 of 1% off over here, all of these things that had to come together to 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance that we'd ever have this universe with conscious life in it, you realize that that wasn't an accident. It didn't just accidentally appear here. Something said this is going to happen and that's going to happen and all these things are going to come together and it is going to evolve into conscious life, trying to evolve to a higher level. And that is all in some kind of a plan. I don't want to say there's a God with a gray beard up there on a cloud directing the plan. That's not what I'm saying. I like better from Star Wars, the Force. There is a force that makes the universe go. And most of the Nobel laureate scientists who gave us quantum electrodynamics, Einstein and Schrodinger and Paul Dirac and all these people, they actually believe that there is a power, a force, something directing it. We want to personify it as a separate God, separate from us, and I don't believe there's any separation at all. Non-locality tells us there isn't even any space. It's all in one little spot. Okay, so non-locality, we've now proven it, I think, 12 times. It's absolutely true. Non-locality is real. There is no dimension, no space. It's an illusion that we like to see. So it's beyond our comprehension, but it's very real. And those Nobel laureates who were all geniuses, they really got this. Max Planck said in 1900, this is before Einstein's theories come out in 1905, 1906, consciousness is the matrix of reality. built on consciousness. He already knew that. He gave us quantum electrodynamics as time went on. He and Paul Dirac, they put this all together in Schrodinger's equation. Consciousness is the matrix of reality. It's the framework on which reality is placed. Everything is made of consciousness. The quarks and the gluons that are made of a vibration. When we talk about string theory, we see vibrations. What are those vibrations? They're thoughts. What's holding the thought? A consciousness. Okay, so consciousness is what everything's made out of. And so the rock was conscious. The plant there in the corner, see how it likes to reach around to the light? That plant is conscious of where the light is, and it's responding to that light. It's putting its leaves over by the sunshine. We don't understand the logic. One of my favorite people is Carl Sagan. He did the cosmology TV series that we had, and he's an astronomer. And I love what he says. He says, we just don't know. And he's talking about how much we don't know. And he says, I can't think of the exact quote, but it's something like this. I know there's a big surprise waiting for us. We're just going to discover it. I believe that science is at a point where they cannot retreat, and they have to solve this. I believe there will be some knockdown, drag-out fights between various scientists. There will be some real debates. There will be some real arguments. But we're at a point where we cannot deny that the consciousness is real, that it operates outside a body. It operates outside of our 3 dimensions plus time, which we call the standard model. It operates outside of that. We know that. We're very well aware of it. We have lots of data on it. We have no data that is against that. And so it's a time to make a meta paradigm shift, not a mega paradigm shift, a meta paradigm shift into a new reality where we see a larger standard model that includes the dark energy, that includes consciousness. And there are a lot of people in the world now, scientists who are literally feverishly working at this. They're working 24 hours a day, some of them. They want to get there first. There's a mad gold rush on to be the first one to get there, to be able to explain it in a way that's undeniable.
Consciousness is in everything. And the second bit is the opposite is also true. Everything is in consciousness. By which I mean, whatever we experience, whatever we know, is actually an appearance in the mind. The brain creates its own image of what is going on out there, and very cleverly ties that in with the sound it hears, the feeling of sitting in the seat, whatever else, and creates this wonderful 3-dimensional, hi-fi, surround sound, touchy-feely, virtual reality which we live in. So, again, this is something science cannot deny, but it never explores the implications of this. Everything we know is an experience in the mind. That's all we ever know. It's the forms which consciousness takes on. So you could say experience is an informing of consciousness. So the alternative meta-paradigm that I've been exploring is much more, another way of putting it is consciousness is a fundamental quality of the cosmos, as fundamental as space, time, and matter.
Consciousness is first. We call this biocentrism. That's the closest. It comes out of biology. Robert Lanza is the one who speaks on this a lot. Bruce Lipton's pretty good with it too. You can look at these biologists and see what they're saying. And they're talking about that life created the universe. And when you look at all of the things that have happened in astronomy, each thing that had to happen, it could only be caused by a plan. And if it's following a plan or order, or as Shakespeare's always talking about, is there order or chaos in the universe? If it's following a plan, then there has to be a consciousness behind it. To define that consciousness, exactly how it works, I can't do that. I can tell you it's there, and in my heart, I know it's there. In my science, I want to explain it. People who are involved in science want to be comfortable. Some of them want to think we know everything. Well, if you want comfort, you shouldn't be in science. Science is looking over the edge where you can't see, just being out of sight, looking over the edge to find out what's new and bringing it up and dredging it up with your experiments and saying, aha, finding something new. It's a discovery. If you know everything, you don't have a business. There's no science. If you already know everything, there's no science left. Science is finding out what we don't know. Hey, look at this. And people don't realize that whatever ontology that they have, whatever belief they have about a worldview, is in fact a religion. Atheism is a religion. Your religion is what you think about our relationship to the universe. Whatever you think is our relationship to the universe is your religion. And if your religion is there is no God, that's your religion. If your religion there is a God, that's your religion. If your religion is like mine, somewhere between those, which says the consciousness may appear to be a God to many people, but it is just us, all of us, our consciousness. Each of us will admit, I am conscious. You're conscious, I'm conscious. We see each other, we're conscious of each other. We're obviously having a conscious experience. No matter whether the brain created it or we created it or what, we're conscious. That consciousness is real. And any idea to try to deny that it's real is in error. Now that we know it's real, let's define what it is. As we know what it is, then let's find out how it works. If we're going to do that, we have to look at consciousness. We can't say, oh, I pushed consciousness out of physics. It's over there in metaphysics. I'm not going to look at it. I'm busy here. It's too late for that, this hard problem. Where did the consciousness come? We have to answer these questions. That's where we're at. That's where science has arrived at. We have to discover, is there a consciousness or is there not a consciousness? And that's what we have to define. And that's the only way we're going to define that is to look at it.
What we start realizing is the world out there is actually nothing like our experience of it. And the fundamental mistake, I think, that we make the whole time is we literally mistake our experience to be a representation, an accurate representation of the world, rather than realizing it's just our experience. The world itself is nothing like our experience. And this is what physics is beginning to realize. The hard question is not how does insentient matter ever give rise to experience? How does consciousness manifest into all these diverse forms? Consciousness is fundamental. You answer this question, however, not through theory or mathematics or science. You do it by experiment, but the experiment is in the mind. And this is what the mystics have done. And the conclusions of these experiments come out statements like this, says Muktananda: Earth, moon, stars and sun revolve inside me. But this isn't just unique to Muktananda. You find this again and again and again in mystical teachings. The world is inside me. Which brings us back to the age-old question which Fred touched upon. What do we mean by I? So what we really mean by I, and this is what you realize, I think, the more meditation you do, is the feeling of I or amness is the feeling of consciousness itself. It's just that feeling of being something isn't actually anything to do with being an individual, just the feeling of being aware. And then we then make the mistake of thinking the I is a thing. It's this reification again. We make experiences things, we have this feeling of I-ness, and we say, oh, it's a thing. What is it? But there's nothing there. Just like there's no matter there. The truth is you are consciousness, period. Thomas Merton said, if I penetrate to the depths of my own existence, to the indefinable am that is my self in its deepest roots, then through this deep center I pass into the infinite I am, which is the very name of the Almighty. Is that experience of that deep, deep sense of I-ness, that deep sense of amness, is what we call God. And when you're in deep meditation, the qualities that start arising are the qualities we ascribe to God. You know, God is peace. There's that deep peace in meditations, that the heart opens, that feeling one is love. You know you are love, but it's usually covered up by all the other stuff that's going on. God is light, the light of consciousness. In fact, if we say God is, even looking from a traditional point of view, God is the source of everything. Everything in the world, as I've been saying, is a manifestation of consciousness. God is consciousness. The way we know God is by knowing consciousness in its essence.
We are everything. We are conscious. We are part of everything. When you understand non-locality, if you really look at non-locality closely, there is no space. There is no expansion. There is no openness, this huge thing. The whole universe is located in one little singularity, one little spot. The whole universe is one thought being thought somewhere, okay? And we are all part of everything. If I injure the plant over there, I'm injuring myself. Okay? I'm part of the whole. Each of our consciousness is a little piece of sand, and the big consciousness is the whole beach made of all the pieces of sand, all together. You bring all those little pieces of sand together, you have a huge consciousness called the beach. And that's how we have to see it. We are part of the whole. Pierre Chillard de Chardin, he said, we cannot rip a piece of the fabric apart from the whole and look at it. It's all one. There is no separation. This is something we study in the near-death experience studies. When we die, we have a life review. And the life review is not looking back at all the good things I did. It's looking back at, in every instance, when I had a choice and I could have done a more right thing or a less right thing, how did the other person feel? It's not how I felt, it's how did they feel in every emotional situation. And that's what our life review is. We get to sit in the other person's seat for every one of those experiences for our whole life and feel how they felt. So if we murdered somebody, we get to feel how they felt. Okay? That's what we get to do. We have to realize that we were wrong, and we have to make reparation for that. And when we know we've wronged someone, we need to get their forgiveness for it. And sometimes we've wronged a child, and we've died at old age after wronging the child. Now the child isn't going to die for a while, and we're on the other side over there, and we want to make progress over there, and we can progress on either side. We have to get that, we have to say I'm sorry to that child. So we have to come through to that child as a spirit and say I'm sorry, and get their forgiveness and get their understanding before we can move on. I don't know if that's true or not. It makes good sense to me. I don't have science to prove it. And people are always asking me, what do I think? And I have to say, well, it feels good to me, but we don't know. These are the things I know. I died and went to the other side, and it appears I can talk to people who are over there now. I know those two things are true. Now, the way I explain them, I don't have the science to back up all of that, but that seems very real to me. The afterlife is real, and those people are living over there, and they talk to us, and they still love us. And it seems to me it's all about love. And that's the thing. It's got to be in the middle. Everything is powered by love. I love what John Lennon says, all there is love. I love that thought because it is the truth. When I'm very much in love with people on the other side, and I talk to them, just like I talk to loved ones on this side. I mean, it's very important talking. And that's the thing that moves across the veil is love. If there's no love, you're not going to get messages. You're not going to hear anything. We're born with guides, and the guides are attracted by your interests. Whatever you're interested in and they're interested in. If I'm interested in physics, then James Clerk Maxwell likes to talk to me, and he has on occasion come through mediums. James Clerk Maxwell, Maxwell's equations. I haven't heard from Einstein, but Gary has. We hear from these guys who think like we do. They come back and talk to us. Those guides are out there. They're not with us forever, but we start with guides in our childhood. You might call them guardian angels if you want, that are always with us, guiding us. These guides, when we need them, come through. This is how we call it the muse. People who write, who do theater, who do music, they, I forget, is it Mozart? He said, I just hear it and write it down. Well, how does he hear it? Where's it coming from? Okay? It's given to you from the universe. And Goethe, Wolfgang von Goethe, he says, when you decide, the universe moves. And it starts bringing things to you. When you decide something, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to make this happen, I'm going to see about it. The universe moves and everything starts happening. But until you firmly believe and firmly decide a thing, the universe is inert. It just waits for you. Your intent causes everything to happen. It's based on our belief, and the guides tell me all the time, the more you believe in us, the more power we have. So this is why also I don't believe in evil spirits. They have no power because I don't give them any energy. I give all my energy to positive spirits. And I give lots of energy and lots of things coming from there because I give it lots of energy. It is our intent that determines everything. And without intention or with misguided or confused, ambiguous intention, nothing happens. When you want 3 things, you won't get any of them. You want one, now you have focused, concentrated energy, and suddenly that thing is going to happen.